Hi. She already told you my name. I'm Penny Poston. And I just told my husband, I said, we go every Monday night and there's always faces of people I'm thinking, I've never seen them before. But a lot of times, maybe we go to a different service. I go to the first service. So I may not see you there, but it's always crowded anyway. So I just want to say hello. And my name is Penny. Um, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and then dig into my story, but I have a couple of things I want to add is that maybe you all feel this way, but my story is a little bit like a soap opera. I mean, there are so many ups and downs and twists and turns, and I promise you I'm not going to keep you here all night, but there's a lot of stuff I had to edit and leave out because there's just so much going on. But the main thing I want to focus on is through it all, God was with me, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So I'll give you a little background on myself. My dad was 28 years old, and my mother was 18 when they got married. And there was a lot of eyebrows raised at that 10-year age spread back in the 50s. So I was born on April 5th, 1958 in Killeen, Texas. 3 years later, we added my sister Jo to our family, and then 8.5 years later came my sister, Robin. Now, I have a life scripture. I don't know if anyone else has adopted a life scripture, but if you haven't, it's something you might want to think about doing. But this is one of the first scriptures I ever learned, and it has been with me forever, so I'll share that with you now. It's Isaiah 41:10. Can you guess? Could you guess that? And see your pens, those purple pens on the table for you. Anyway, and I am reading out of the Message version just because I just kind of like the way it's kind of cut and dried. My life scripture is, "Don't panic, I am with you. There is no need to fear, for I am your God. I'll give you strength, I'll help you, I will hold you steady and keep a firm grip on you." In other words, fear not, as I said. But did you know that the phrase, "do not be afraid," is written in the Bible 365 times? That means every day, one time a day, God tells us, you're fearless. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. And you can take that with you everywhere. I verified that 2 or 3 times. Someone else had told me that, and it's true. It's there 365 times. If I was going to title my testimony, like I said, I told you it was kind of a soap opera, but I thought this kind of sums it up. Sometimes your best blessings come out of your worst situations. God promises something good out of your storms, and I'm living proof of that. I have clinged to that life verse and to that thought many times over the years. I grew up where I was told to keep secrets. I lived in a house full of secrets. We always lived in a decent home. We had nice, clean clothes, and there was always good food on our table. My parents did not believe in spanking, and I'll probably get some boos about this, but I've never had a spanking in my life, and neither did either one of my sisters. My dad was a Rolling Stone from 1958 to 1970. We lived in 9 different states, and there were just too many towns to count in those states, and too many homes in each town in those states. In the 3rd grade, I went to 3 different schools in 3 different states. But for some reason, Midland, Texas kind of became our home base. And we went back and forth many times to Midland. And finally, from the age of 9 to 12, we called it home. So when people ask me where I'm from, I was born in Killeen, but I consider Midland, Texas my home. I was married in Midland, Texas. And I did not understand it at the time because I didn't know too much about God, but He was with me through every one of those moves. I am blessed to have seen and learned a lot about a lot of different places, and I have made many friends across the United States, and a lot of friends here in the Panhandle. My whole life group sitting over there at that table. So it's been a very fortunate thing for me, and I can't say that it was a bad thing. However, it did give me feelings of insecurity, believe it or not. I was bashful at one time in my life. And, I just didn't feel like I could ever stay long enough to get to know somebody. And so I steered clear of making a best friend because I knew I was just going to be leaving. However, change is never easy, but God was with me all the way through it, and his love never changed for me. And though I didn't realize it then, I came to realize it when I was older. Now, my dad was my hero. A lot of little girls may say that. Some of you may not have been that fortunate, but my dad was my hero. He loved my mom and all of us girls, with the three of us. He always called us his boys. Now, he'd say, "Come on, boys, let's get in the car. Come on, boys, it's bedtime. Boys, settle down." And then we knew we had settled down because we didn't want one of those spankings we'd been hearing about. But he worked hard to provide for us. He never missed a day's work. He never took his vacations, and I didn't understand until I was older. It was because he took the pay from those vacations to pay for Christmas. I didn't know that till I was older. He was funny, he had a great sense of humor, and he was loving, and he was very protective of all of us. But my big secret about my dad was that he was an alcoholic. Now, a lot of us grow up with heavy drinking in our family, and I know, and it's not an easy thing to live with, but my dad was a full-blown alcoholic. My mother warned us, you are never to discuss your dad's drinking outside of our home, and especially we weren't to tell my grandparents, her parents. They already had a thing about my dad because there was such an age gap, so she never do that. And I think it's important for me to share here that my dad had 9 brothers and no sisters. I think that's probably why he called us boys, because he was so used to hearing that all of his life, boys settle down and that kind of stuff. But my dad and his father and 8 out of 9 of his brothers were all alcoholics. One guy escaped, my oldest uncle, and he's just recently passed away. But we have a long history of alcoholism, some drug abuse, and a lot of divorces on that side of the family. The other side, they're doing pretty good over there, but my dad's side of the family. Now, my mom and I had what I'm going to say is a complicated relationship, and that's probably not real unusual for some people too, but she was a stay-at-home mom. Despite all the moves, she kept a really clean house. She cooked wonderful meals and made holidays magical. She was kind of like you, Vanda. She had a Christmas tree in every single room of her house. And she saw to it that we always had presents wrapped that looked like they came from Neiman Marcus or something. And it was really a fun time in my life. But she had a problem with me for some reason. She was terribly detached from me. And it was obvious to other family members, would bring it up and ask me about it when I was just a little kid. I don't know. But she never, ever once told me she loved me. I don't ever remember that. She never gave me a hug. She never put me in her lap. She didn't do any of that stuff like she did with my sisters. But my dad did, and that was one reason why he was so special to me. My dad would do that. The big secret I had to keep about my mother, and I didn't learn this until I was a little bit older, is that she was battling mental illness and had for years. And that's kind of, when you find that out a little bit later in your life, it explained a few things to me. It helped me to understand a few more things. But she didn't act like the other moms, any of the other moms I knew. So I spent a lot of time at my friends' houses, feeling welcome and like moms should do and stuff. But she was hospitaled several times throughout my childhood. And she ate tranquilizers like they were candy. And I didn't know what it was, but I know she'd say, I need my pill. And I didn't know until later in life that's what it was. And she slept most of the day. So when my sisters and I came home from school, and if the house was all dark, we knew that it was going to be one of those days, and so I was going to have to take charge. I saw to it that our homework got done, that we had a meal on the stove or on the table so that when my dad came home from work, he had something to eat. And I got us all bathed and made sure we were ready for bed and got us to bed. But my dad just came home, and that made him drink even more because my mom was in bed asleep. I was 10 years old before I really realized we got something going on here in this house, For many years, I was emotionally abused by my grandparents, my mother's parents, because they were constantly, when they'd get me alone, and we went out there, they lived in San Antonio, and we'd go every summer for 2 weeks. They would grill me over and over and over about what goes on, that forbidden subject, what goes on in your household. My mother had made us promise not to tell anybody what went on in our household. They knew my dad had a drinking problem, and they knew my mother had mental problems. And they told me that was my fault. That is a very hard thing to hear as a child. And I lived with that for years. And it took me until I was 26 years old to say, I've had enough. I'm not listening to you. I'm having nothing else to do with you. You don't exist in my world. And I got counseling, and through counseling and prayer, I kind of quit playing those tapes over and over in my head. But I was 26 before I could do that. But I tell you, it was a freedom like I can't even express. I knew I never had to go to another Christmas at their house. I didn't have to take their phone calls. And it worked out pretty well for me. I did go to both of their funerals when they passed. I did that out of respect for my mother. Anyway, in 1968 then, we were still living in Midland, Texas, and I was still just loving it. And I finally got confident enough to get a couple of friends. Some of my very best friends are still from there. When my dad came home and I heard that dreaded sentence, we're going to move. This time, he told us we are moving to a place called Wilcox, Arizona. Now, has anybody in here ever heard of Wilcox, Arizona? Probably not. I hadn't heard of it either, but let me tell you, I wasn't happy about it. So anyway, my dad told me that you're going to love it. We're going to live way out in the country. And I was a city girl living in a neighborhood in Midland, Texas. I didn't think that sounded good. And he said, and you're going to have to ride the school bus. Well, when he told me I'm going to have to ride a school bus, I really threw a big old fit because I thought, I'm not riding a school bus. I've never ridden a school bus, and that didn't sound very pleasant to me. But let me tell you a few little sidelines real fast about Wilcox. Probably nobody in here is old enough to remember this guy but me, but there was a star by the name of Rex Allen. He was a country, you may know him. He was a country singer and a cowboy actor, and he was the familiar voice some of you may have heard on Old Yeller, that really smooth, mellow voice. That was Rex Allen. And Charlie the Lonesome Cougar, some of those shows, they're way before some of your times. But anyway, he was known. That was my claim to fame, as I was living in the town where Rex Allen was born. In fact, I even worked with his aunt when I had a job in high school at the hospital. She trained me on a switchboard. So I thought, man, now I'm really something. You know, people are going to take notice when I walk down the street. But anyway, and the other thing is, some of you may not know this, but a little girl from Seminole, Texas moved there and went to school with Neil and I. Her name was Tanya Tucker. And she left school to go and cut a record, Delta Dawn, which most of you probably know Delta Dawn. But yeah, in fact, in the third grade, I wasn't there yet, but Neil's mother told me that they used to do a maypole dance, and Neil and Tanya Tucker were dancing partners. I'm going to have to ask her about that someday. But anyway, but the first thing I thought when that day came when I had to get on that school bus, and I was a nervous wreck. I said, I have never ridden a bus. They're probably all, I thought I'm going to have to get on there, and they're all going to be staring at me and thinking I'm different, and I got this Texas accent. Well, I didn't know that 90% of the people in Wilcox, Arizona were transplanted from Texas. They're growing wheat and cotton and all kinds of stuff there. But way in the back of the bus, there was the cutest little cowboy with blue eyes, and I thought, well, things are kind of looking up here. I may not like this. I may not hate this place so bad. Maybe it's going to be better than I thought it was. And I finally found out that person was Neil Poston, who I'm now married to. But I kind of accepted. I thought, I'm going to have to get me some boots. And, I started wearing Levi's and stuff like that. And I started trying to be more like the people in that town were. But anyway, when I was 10 years old, let me backtrack just a little bit. I got invited to go to a revival. I couldn't think of what the word was, of a revival. And so I went, and it was packed. It was a football stadium in Midland. And out of all those people, one person on that stage seemed to make eye contact just with me, and it was Terry Bradshaw. Let me tell you, I know he was just looking at me. And, he forgot about all those other people. And he said these words I will never forget. I know you feel alone in this crowd, and I know you are scared and tired of keeping secrets, but Jesus sees you right where you are, and He is calling you to come to know Him. He will change your life forever, and you will never feel alone again. Just come as you are. Make a great song, wouldn't it? Anyway, just come as you are. And so I was with a friend and her mother and her dad and everything, and I stood up, and they were looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And I went down there to the front, and I knelt at that altar, and I asked Jesus into my life. And I was so excited to go home and tell my mother. So I went in and I said, "Mom, I accepted Jesus in my heart today." And she said, "Well, that's nice, dear." But she went out and she bought me a Bible. It was called The Way. I don't know if you guys even know that was a Bible they had for young people then. And I started saying little prayers, and I would just read a little bit of that Bible every day. And that's all I knew. Now, we were Creasters. We went to church on Christmas and Easter. And if I was lucky and a friend invited me to church, I'd go. But it was all different denominations that I went to, so I didn't know where I fit in. But anyway, I knew a little bit about church. But I was fortunate enough that years later in Wilcox, Arizona, I had an English teacher, and her name was Mrs. Buck. And Mrs. Buck took me under her wing. She taught a class called The Bible as Literature. And she saw something in me that she wanted to take me under her wing and mentor me. She got me involved in Rainbow Girls. I don't even know if they still have that today, do they? But anyway, Rainbow Girls, it was a Methodist organization for girls, and I got to wear a orange velvet evening gown, and oh man, I really thought I was something in that thing. We got to go out and be presented a rose, and it was just fun. It was a lot of fun. But she also took me to church with her. She'd say, "I'm gonna come by and pick you up on Sunday," and I was used to sleeping in on Sunday morning, so she'd say, "No, I want you up. I'm gonna come by and pick you up." She took me to the Methodist church. And then one year, she even drove me back and forth to camp, and I went to camp for the first time, and I think I was 14 or 15, and I met so many people from the surrounding counties, and I had the time of my life. And I told somebody there that I've already asked Jesus in my heart. I just don't know what to do with that. If you don't have some kind of guidance, you don't know what you do. But this is where I want to give a shout out to Christian teachers, because you make a difference in people's life. You make a difference in a young man or a young woman's life. And you might not think you do, but you do. And just recently, Mrs. Buck passed away, and I had stayed close with her all these years. And I remembered the things she taught me, and now I'm friends with her daughters on Facebook, of course. But she made a big difference in my life, especially because my mother wasn't quite there. And I don't know how Mrs. Buck knew that about me. I don't imagine anybody ever told her, but she knew. In 1970 then, that was in 1970 when I met her, but also at that time, my friendship with Neil grew. He became my confidant. He became my protector. And all through high school, we were the best of friends. But then graduation came, and his granddad had told my dad that he had a premonition that Neil and I were going to get married, but we were going our separate ways. He wanted to work on a ranch in New Mexico. I wanted to go to college in Flagstaff. I didn't want to live on a ranch. But he went his way, I went mine. But we stayed in constant contact with each other. Phone calls. My phone bill was outrageous up at NAU and Flagstaff, and I have sent it to my dad, and he'd say, "Who are you calling so much? You got these long-distance phone calls." And then we'd visit each other. And then our parents remained friends, so when I'd go home to Wilcox, we were still connected that way. And I don't know, before you know it, we just got closer and closer. But when I was 16 there in Wilcox, and my dad was still a heavy drinker, he would come home from work and drink till he went to sleep, and he would, Saturday and Sunday, those were his drinking days. He never drank during the day, so it didn't interfere with his job. But I often wondered if that wasn't why we moved so often. I never knew, and I never asked. So, but anyway, it was his, I was 16, so it was about his 46th birthday, I believe. And my mother made a big dinner and a big cake like she always does, and he didn't come home. And so after about an hour and a half of us sitting there and lighting and blowing out the candles and lighting and blowing out the candles, she said, "You're going to have to go look for him." I had my license. Wilcox is a little bitty town. Like I said, we had one stoplight. I think I told you that. And so it wasn't hard to find him. And he was drinking with some of his best buddies, celebrating his birthday. And by the time I found him, he was in really, really bad shape. He couldn't hardly walk, and I had to get him into my car. And he wasn't making any sense, but I got him home. I took him home. We got him out of the car and got him in the house, but he was so intoxicated that he passed out. And we could not get him to wake up. We did all the things you see in movies. We were splashing water in his face. We were doing all the stuff, shaking him. You didn't have 911 then. We didn't call an ambulance. We didn't want anybody in town to know, like they didn't know we already drank. But anyway, when you have 3,500 people know when you sneeze. So, everybody knew. But but I thought of one person I could call to help us, and his name was Neil. And so I called him up. He said, "I'll be there in just a minute." And he got there really quick. And he helped us. He stayed with us till my dad got alert. And when my dad was rational enough to understand, Neil said to him the words that we couldn't say. He said, "Your drinking is going to kill you. You're going to lose your family." He was 16 years old also. He says, you're going to pull this family apart, and you're going to regret this someday. You need to get some help. And so with Neil there, and to my mother and I, my dad said, and he was a little bit slurred, he said, "I look you in the eye and I give you my word. Today is the last day I take a drop of alcohol. I will never drink again." Well, I'm 16 and I'm smart enough to know. I thought that was the alcohol talking. I thought there's no way. But he did it. And he did not have any help. There was no, except for God. And of course, I was praying really hard about this situation because I knew to pray for it. And I did share it with Mrs. Buck, and she was praying too. And he, with the help of his family, he had a lot of Snickers bars, because I guess as you're getting the alcohol out of your system, you're craving that sugar. And God, my dad never drank another drop. Now, I know that doesn't happen for everybody, and I wished it did, but it is one of my biggest blessings, and that's another reason why he is my hero. So anyway, we knew at that time, I knew, Mrs. Buck told me, God is with y'all. He is with you while your dad goes through this. He is watching you. You can pray. Your whole family can be praying. Even my mom and my sisters joined in, and we prayed for him, and he never drank again. And life was really good after that for a little while. But then I heard some rumors in that little small town that my sister, who was 13 years old at the time, had started smoking marijuana. Now, this was the 70s. That was kind of popular there for some groups. I wasn't in that group. I promise you I wasn't. It wasn't my thing. But it was her thing, and I struggled with how to handle that. I struggled. Anyway, I'll circle back around to that later and tell you a little bit more about that situation. But when God tells you, in Jeremiah 33, he says, "Call to me, and I will answer you and tell you great things that you do not know." I had read that verse, but I just thought, what is it I don't know? I found out pretty quickly that my blue-eyed, handsome cowboy called me on the phone, and over a long distance, he proposed to me. So in 1981, God heard and answered my prayers, because I had been praying that since I was 12 years old. And we'd been just like this since we were 12 years old, and I didn't have a clue that he really felt that way about me, but he did. And this August, we'll celebrate our 44th anniversary, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made, and pretty good one for him too, I think. You'll have to ask him. You can ask him on Sunday. But anyway, sadly, Neil's granddad passed away just months before we got married, so he never really knew we were getting married. We hadn't, we didn't have a real long engagement. If you've known each other since you're 12, you could get married tomorrow if you had all the plans made. But anyway, after we got married, Neil and I talked together as young couples and, marriages do, and so we said, we've got a 5-year plan here. We are going to work and save our money so we can buy our own house. We rented a house that was his grandmother's, a little 2-bedroom house. It was the cutest thing, but we wanted our own house. So we were going to save our money, and we were going to have 2 children. We were going to have a boy and a girl. Now, this was our plan, but it was not God's plan. It was not God's plan for us. And I have to remind myself still today, my plan is not always going to be God's plan for me. Just like, let me see, 2 days after my first anniversary, my first baby boy was born. His name is Justin. And then 3 years after Justin came, my second baby boy came. His name was Skylar. And the doctor told me, you shouldn't have any more children. I had a difficult pregnancy. And he said, you really shouldn't have any more children. So I thought, I guess a girl's not in God's plans for me. Maybe. I'll share that a little bit later too. But anyway, that's just one key thing I want everybody to remember, that you can plan all you want. And sometimes even when it doesn't happen, you feel discouraged, like, why hasn't God given me what I want? Well, he knows what you need. It may not be what you want. So 9 years later, after when our kids were, 8 and whatever they were, I don't remember whatever that is. Do the math, I can't figure it out. But anyway, Neil comes in, and guess what words I heard again? We're going to have to move. He'd gotten a better offer in a place called Yuma, Arizona. Now, has anybody ever heard of Yuma, Arizona? Okay. You probably saw 510 to Yuma or whatever that movie is, and it's horrible. I'm going to just tell you, well, sorry, people in Yuma, my friends in Yuma. 110 degrees for 8 months out of the year, plus I've seen it 124 there at midnight. I'm not kidding. And nothing but desert and cactus. And we were on the California border, which was kind of cool because we were an hour and a half to 2 hours over to San Diego, and that was real nice. We went there quite a bit. And then we were on the Mexican border. 8 miles from our house was the Mexican border. And so we got some really good Mexican food. That's another plus with Yuma, Arizona. But back to the time when we were living in Wilcox real quick. Wilcox is only 80 miles from Fort Huachuca. Does anybody know anyone who was stationed at Fort Huachuca? Pastor Curtis. Well, we didn't know him, of course, because we're older than he is. But anyway, still, I thought, isn't that a coincidence? So when we came here and he told us that we were, guess where we lived? And we said Wilcox, and he goes, oh my gosh, he knew right where it was, So we thought that was another historical fact I should have listed down there. But anyway, Pastor Curtis. And guess what else? Pastor Curtis is affiliated with Yuma Proving Grounds, Army Proving Grounds. He was stationed there for a while, and here that was another part. It's just kind of, I don't know, it gives me goosebumps. But anyway, we went there, and I had a plan. I was going to live there 2 years, and I was headed back to Phoenix as fast as I could go because we didn't have that. Well, we had the heat, but we didn't have all that ugly cactus and desert unless you drove out. We were there for 30 years. I kid you not. We were there for 30 years. God had a plan for us to be there for 30 years. Do you think it's a coincidence, though, that after that 30 years, Neil finally kept his commitment to me? He said, I'll get you back to Texas someday because he knew I was a native Texan. And he did get me back here in 2017. We started coming to this church in 2018. But I don't think it was a coincidence that even though we didn't know him, Pastor Curtis, and right away Neil just hit it off with him because they started talking about Sierra Vista and Fort Huachuca and all the stuff, around there, and they hit it off. And then when we told him our son lives in Yuma, and he still works at Yuma Proving Grounds, and he goes, I was stationed at the Yuma Proving Grounds. It was later, but I don't think it's a coincidence that God brought us here to Harvest Connection. I really don't. I mean, I don't believe in coincidence, first of all. But I think God was guiding us here all those years. Now, some good things did come out of us living in Yuma. We built a new home, our brand new home from scratch. We were our first new home. Our boys went to a school that was just 1 block east of us. So it was walking distance, but I was a overprotective parent. They could walk that 1 block, but I was in the car going behind them. And my son told me, Mom, I'm in the 6th grade. Could I try to ride my bike? Oh, I don't know about that, but I finally let him start doing that. But anyway, and another good thing was they built a church 1 block west of us, and that became our home church. Now, for years and years, it was just the boys and I going. Neil didn't go because he was busy, and one of the downsides of him they moved us to Yuma, for goodness sake, and then they started shipping him off places, growing pumpkins out here, and he was coming to Texas, he was going to Kansas and Oklahoma and New Mexico, and I was left there with those 2 boys, and by myself, and it was just, anyway, I was going to church and taking him to church. He'd come home, he was tired. He had to do his honey-do list. He had to mow the lawn. He couldn't go to church. And I was praying for him all along. And I shared some of this, I think, today with Vanda. Anyway, I'll tell you a little bit more about Neil and his church going here in a minute. But I volunteered at the church, and that was the first time I'd ever volunteered at a church. And I was so excited to help and do however I could. And one day, our pastor took notice of me, and he said, "You're down here a lot." And I said, "Yeah, I love it. It means something to me." And he said, "Would you be interested in a job?" And I said, "What kind of a job?" Because I kind of got my hands full. And he said, "Well, because you're so close, it would be real nice, and your hours could be flexible." 22 years later, I retired as the administrator of that church, and it was the biggest blessing that I ever received. I mean, I had no idea God would ever have me working in a church. No idea. And I think I shared this with Eloise also too, about years later, I would say sometimes it's casually like, "Why don't you come to church?" And he'd come on Easter, he came on Christmas, but he helped a lot down there. He'd put things together and he helped do all this stuff, but he just wasn't real faithful about going. And I prayed about him being baptized. He had not been baptized. In Yuma, I made the decision to finally get baptized. 24 years earlier, I had accepted Christ, but I kept saying, "I don't see the significance of being baptized. I don't understand that." Well, you're going to learn the significance if you ever go to a Baptist church. And that was a Baptist church I joined, and it was very important to them at that time that I get baptized. They didn't make me. They didn't say I had to, but they just kept talking to me about it. Somebody kept taking me under their wing again and talking to me. So I made the decision to get baptized. And over the years, my mother was baptized in that church. My 2 boys were baptized in that church. All my nieces and nephews were baptized in that church. And one day, I was sitting in there. I made all the baptism certificates, and I had made up 6. 6 people were being baptized. They were baptized. Of course, they're dunked, like we do here. And then the pastor said, "Okay, now we have 1 more person to be baptized today." And out comes Neil. And I was like, "What?" I wanted to stand up and go, "What the heck are you doing up there?" But I didn't. And church ladies ran to me and started sitting me and patting me on the back because they knew I was going to blubber, and I blubbered today. I was telling Amanda about it. And I thought, what on earth? Why couldn't he tell me? At first, that was my first thought. And I thought, this little voice said, "What difference does it make if he told you? He told me, And so Neil was baptized. And the pastor made a big to-do about he's a man behind the scenes. He's a quiet man. He doesn't want a lot of attention. And he said, in fact, his wife didn't even know he was going to do this. And, of course, then everybody's turning around staring at me in the back. But anyway, I don't care how it happened. It happened. And if you know Neil, he's one of the kindest, gentlest souls. He's a good man, and he's a believer. And, we pray together. We studied together. And it's just worked out really well for us. But I'd like to say that everything was all happy-go-lucky and that we had a perfect little life, but we hit some bumps and curves along the way. So I'll share some of those, but never forget that I knew that God was with us. And if I forgot it, Neil was reminding me. He's been with you through this, and he's still with you now. In 1997, my dad became extremely ill, and we knew he wasn't probably going to make it. He lived in ICU for 40 days. I was given permission by the church. They gave me a leave of absence, a paid leave of absence, to go spend those days with my dad till he passed. It was very difficult. That was the first one of our parents that we lost, and my dad was fairly young. He was 58 years old. And It just, he had a liver disease. But anyway, so that was the first thing that happened. But I was still blessed. And Neil told me, be thankful you have this job that allows you to be there with him. And you were there when he drew his last breath. And so I was. Now, my mom was a widow at 58. No, my dad was 68. I said 58. My dad was 68. Anyway, my mother was 58. She told me, go on back home. I stayed a week or two to trying to help her get situated. She says, going back home. I'll be fine on my own. And we thought she would. And I said, well, I'll be back out several times a year, and you can come out and see us and all that. Well, in 2 years, she blew through every bit of savings that they had. And it wasn't a whole lot, but they had she lasted her 20 years, let's say, 15 maybe. But she blew through it all. She bought herself a convertible. She had new furniture like I can't believe. And she lived in Horseshoe Bay on the water in a condominium. And I was like, I told Neil, how's she being able to do that? Well, I didn't know also is that she thought she had to pay off those hospital bills, and she was sending thousands and thousands of dollars every month to the hospitals for my dad. And anyway, but Neil came to the rescue once again, and he set me down, and he said, she's our mom. We better go get her. Now, I told you about my mother and my relationship, and I was like, I don't want to. I'm sorry, but I said, I don't really think that'll work out for us well at all. We're going to get her an apartment here or what? He goes, no, for a little while, we're taking her in our home. Because I was, going to follow his lead. We went out and we got her and we took her out. She moved into our home, our house. My youngest son was in the 10th grade, and so he was still occupying a bedroom, but my oldest son had just graduated and left home, so she got his bedroom. And so we lived, and actually it worked out really well. My mother and I got a little bit closer during that time because Neil traveled so much, and my mom was my companion. But let me circle back around here just a little bit to my sisters too, and this fits in right here. While my mother was living with us, my youngest sister's first marriage ended in divorce, and her daughter Molly was 3 months old at the time, and I was very fond of that. Was my first niece or nephew, and I thought she hung the moon. She was a little angel, and she became a really big part of my life. So after her first birthday, every year I'd come out to Texas, fly out to Texas, take little Molly home with me, and she might stay 2 or 3 months because her mother was struggling so much with raising her, and she went to stenography school, and I kept her while her mother did that school and stuff like that. We were very, very close. But when Molly was 5 years old, her mother remarried, and immediately, just over she had 3 children, and they were 10 and 12 months apart, all 3 of those children. Just boom, boom, boom. And Molly was still coming out, and I would still come out and get her and bring her to my house, but she started acting very funny, very strange. I noticed something was wrong, and I'd ask her about it, and she'd say, I can't tell you. And of course that, in an aunt's heart, when you worship that child, I said, can I ask your mother? She said, no. She was scared. Well, it wasn't too long till we found out what it was. Our worst fears were confirmed. My sister called in the middle of the night. She had been a victim of domestic violence for the past 2 years. And Molly was seeing this. The other kids were 3, 2, and 1. They didn't really know what was going on. But my sister was too ashamed to have told anybody. That's often the case in these situations. But Neil sent me down again. He says, she said, this is what she said to us. She said, I'm getting out of here. I've got the kids loaded up in the car. I had to write this down because I couldn't remember exactly. She and her 4 children were in the car. They had $65 in her purse, a half a tank of gas, 2 bad tires, and just the clothes on their back because she left him in the first opportunity she got. When Neil heard that, he said, you fill your tank up with that $65 and you head towards Arizona, and I will drive there and meet you. Because he had set me down and he said, she's our sister. He'd known her since she was 4 years old. He said, we got to go get her. I was like, I know, but my mom, her 4 kids, what? How can this be? Anyway, he said, it's going to work. Well, for 14 months, she and her 4 kids lived with us. But when they were on their way out there, Neil called me secretly. By that time, I think we did have cell phones, but he called me and he said, prepare your mom for when we get there because she does not look good at all. He said he has beat her bad. And Molly. Because Molly wasn't his biological child, and when she saw him beating her mother that time, she jumped on his back and tried to save her, protect her, and he took a belt buckle to her back. It's horrible, I know, but it's a truth. So, and there's no way, and do you imagine how little I felt thinking, and I was worried about where they're going to stay, But when they got there, we immediately got them. God was with us through that, let me tell you. God was with us. Neil jumped in his truck from Yuma, Arizona, and drove all through the night, and he finally met up with her in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He said they were a pitiful sight. And he told my sister, you go ahead and keep driving. I'll buy y'all some food. We're going to get gas, and we're just going to take our time getting back to Yuma. And so it's about a day's drive, but they got back that evening, and nothing could have prepared us for what we saw. My mother and I were both just horrified. And I felt so sorry for my mother, I felt sorry for them too, don't get me wrong. But we immediately got them some counseling, some medical help, and some legal help. And we took them in our home. 14 months they lived in our home. All four, well, let me say that again. The 3 girls and Robin all shared a room. The little boy, who was only 1, had a playpen at the foot of mine and Neil's bed for 14 months. So guess who had to get up with him every time he wanted anything? I was like, I've done this. My boys are in high school. My sisters were late bloomers. They didn't get the kids till later. But anyway, it worked out. But the good thing was, 14 months later, she found a really good job and a cute little apartment, a condominium thing. Through some type of assistance place, found her this house, and they had their own place, and they moved out. But there was one little twist. Molly asked her mother if she could stay with us in our home and go to the school in our district. There's my girl fix. I raised her in my home, even though her mother was just across town, from the age of 10 through graduation in high school. She graduated from high school with us. It wasn't very long after that. Then let me say to you about my sister Jo. Let me go on and then I'll sum this and close this up. But my sister Jo, I remember I told you she started the marijuana. A lot of people say marijuana is not a gateway drug to other drugs, but I beg to differ because I feel so ugly about not ever sharing that with my parents. It was the 70s. Everybody was smoking pot. I thought, she's going to outgrow this. She's not going to do it forever. No, she didn't do it forever, but she went on. She became addicted to heroin, cocaine, eventually meth. I don't even know what all the doctor did sit me down and talk to me about it. More. She was in and out of jail. She lost her marriage, and she had one daughter who was a teenager. She lost custody of that daughter, and that daughter also became an addict. Beautiful girl. My niece is beautiful. However, God was with us through all of that ugliness. And again, Neil stepped up to the plate because my sister was homeless in Midland, Texas, addicted to drugs. And he says, she's our sister. We got to go get her. And so we drove to Midland and we rescued her off the street. She was sitting by a tree with 4 or 5 boxes full of stuff, and that was her belongings, all she had in the world. And we took her back to us. I'd love to say it was just instantly she was saved and she was healed, but it wasn't instantly. Went through rehab numerous times. I was involved in Al-Anon. I had to go to counseling with her and counseling for myself with dealing with a person like that. But one day she did get clean and sober, and she's been reunited with her daughter, and her daughter is also sober. As a result of her drug use, she did get, has Parkinson's disease. It was early onset Parkinson's, and the doctors told us it was a result of her drug use, and that probably the drug use, she was medicating herself, self-medicating, because she didn't know why she was hearing voices, and she didn't know all this stuff. So she's on the right medications, proper medications for that now, and she's taking medication for Parkinson's. She's doing great. She's doing really good. But, God definitely saw us through that because we didn't know anything about that stuff. We just didn't know. 2012 and 2013 might have been two of the hardest years of my life so far. I'll just say that, so far. This is when Philippians 41:13 really clicked for me. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. He'd already brought me through all this other stuff, but now I didn't know what was ahead of me. In 2012, my mother suffered 11 heart attacks in 12 months. We had frequent flyer miles. Neil did, flying her back to Phoenix from Yuma, Arizona to the heart hospital in Phoenix. I couldn't do it. I was scared to death to be on that plane, and I was scared that my mother might die on that plane. So he said, I'll do it. And he went with her. And I would drive and meet him at the hospital. But by 2013, early 2013, in fact, it was just in January, she succumbed to those. Her little body just finally gave out. She was real tiny. My mother was 4'11". She weighed about 100 pounds. By the way, I'm the tallest girl in my family. I always told all of them, and I'm 5'2". I said, I should be a model. I should have been a model. I don't know. But anyway, my sisters were both shorter than me. My mother was shorter than me. And her little body finally gave way. And yes, I knew God was with us. He saw us through those flights. He saw us nursing her. I had oxygen in my home. I was dialing 911 every other day because something was happening to her. And the little paramedic was somebody my kids went to high school with. And, God was with me. And when she died, we had to, turn the machines off and stuff. When she died, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, you did a good thing. You took care of her, and you did the best you could by her, and she wasn't always nice to you. But your dad is proud of you. And I knew that my mother and my dad, because my mother had been going to church, I knew they were together, and that gave me some comfort. In June of 2013, then, I was getting ready to leave on a medical mission trip. It had always been a dream of mine to be in the Peace Corps, but my mother and dad said, no, that was for hippies. And so they wouldn't let me go in the Peace Corps. But years later, when I joined Oasis Church, it was a blessing to be able to go on many missionary trips. I have been proud to serve with teams that have gone to Mexico, all over Mexico, Africa, Haiti, Israel, and the Dominican Republic. I've been to the Dominican Republic about 10 times. And that's where my heart was for some reason. I sometimes did medical stuff, and no, I wasn't a nurse. I had received a nursing scholarship and turned it down, and I didn't like the sight of blood, but anybody can take a blood pressure and a temperature and check their A1C and stuff like that. So that was my job, and I liked that. But we had to witness. We had to share our testimonies. We had to preach. We had to do all kinds of things on those mission trips, and it was where my heart was. That was one thing I didn't like about getting so much older, if I can say that, because Neil didn't want me to go quite as often as he used to. He used to just say, go on, that's what God's calling you to do. Go ahead. He wasn't into it, but that was my thing. But anyway, I was getting ready to go on a trip to the Dominican Republic, and I always would call my sister, say, don't forget to pray for me now, and this is where we're going to be, and I'll be back in touch, and keep an eye on whatever, I started calling her about 6:30 in the morning to say goodbye, and she wasn't answering her phone. Well, I knew her kids were there, and so I started calling one of her daughters because it was time for us to load up on the van. And her daughter said, well, she's asleep. I said, well, go and wake her up. And I was just really aggravated with that, because I thought, it's after 10 in the morning. Get on up. You got kids and stuff, She went in there, and I could hear her saying, Mommy, get up. Mommy, wake up. But she didn't respond. So I said, Amanda, hang up that phone. I said, hang up the phone now, and I'm coming up there, okay? I called Neil, and I said, something's wrong at Robin's house. He said, I'm on my way. And he got there before I did. And when I pulled up out front, there was an ambulance and her children sitting over here, and Neil had a bad look on his face. And my little sister was 48 years old, and she was gone. She had died in her sleep. Excuse me. She died in her sleep, but I think she died from heartache. I really do. I think she died from a broken heart. She was so young, and she had those 4 children, and at that, they were still young, 10, 11, and 12, and 18, I think is what they were. So I had to call Molly because she had just left to come to Austin to go to school, to college, and she had graduated from high school just a few days before Robin died, just a few days, about a week before Robin died. And I had to call her and tell her to come home. That was a hard call. Her biological dad came with her and got her out there, and so she was there for that. She even sang at her mother's funeral, which I thought was so beautiful. Because first of all, I can't sing worth a lick, but second of all, to stand up there and sing a song for your mother and never shed a tear, and she just did it really well. And it was just in our heads. Neil and I immediately, after we knew she was dead and the kids came up and saw her and everything, started planning. We're going to enclose our patio. Those kids are going to be moving in here. They're all going to be teenagers. We've got to have separate rooms. And we had all these plans, and it wasn't meant to be. The court said I had to contact the dad to let him know that she had passed, the three younger kids' biological dad. And so I said, okay, well, I don't know where to reach him. They said, you need to put out an ad in the paper at the last known place he lived. So for an instance, I thought about lying, saying I don't know where he lives, but I did know where he lived. So we put the ad in the paper, and it wasn't too long until we heard from him. And he was coming to get him. They had not lived with that man for 10 years. They hated him. They were scared of him. They didn't really know everything that had taken place, but other than what their sister told them, because we never discussed it with them. We didn't think we should. But we didn't get to keep them. Now, Molly came on back out after and furthermore, not only did he take them, he didn't let them stay for their mother's memorial service. Yeah. So Molly came on back to Texas after the funeral, but our pastor there set 3 roses on the front seat to represent those 3 kids. They loved those kids. Those kids were raised by our village, by us, our family, by that church. They'd gone to church there all their lives, camp, vacation, Bible school, everything, till their ages. They were still preteens. But that's all they knew. And that when he drove off with them, I just thought that not only have I lost their sister, now I've given up my sister, now I've lost those kids. But the good news about that is they're now grown children. They have a mind of their own. And they all decided to completely disown their dad. They have nothing to do with him. And furthermore, their stepmother was a saint. She did so right by them, and she really did a good job raising them. But their dad did the same thing to her that he did to their mother. And so they witnessed that. And if it wasn't for that stepmother, I don't think they'd be here today. But they're all 3. They're in the military. They're 25, 24, and 23 now. The 2 younger ones are in the Air Force, and the older one's in the Navy. And Molly lives in Austin, and she runs a hair salon. She's a manager of a hair salon. So we're very proud of that. We all knew that God was there, even with that horrible thing. We could not wrap our heads around it, that this was all happening to all of us, but I told them, just wait. God sees you where you are, and he will see you and protect you, and someday you'll come back and be ours, and they are. They call us home base. They call us Aunt Meemaw and Uncle Peepaw, or Uncle Pawpaw, and so we're just like, okay, well, whatever. But they come back to us. And one of the older of the 3 younger ones has gotten married and has a baby, and we're his Meemaw and Papa, and everything. So anyway, that's worked out pretty good. As for our sons, we're immensely proud of them also. They embraced our full house, and that became one big happy family. And they thought that's the way all families lived. They didn't know that you didn't take in all your relatives and have them around you, Our oldest son, Justin, is 43 now, and he works at a gold mine in Nevada. He's a safety manager for gold mines and those big, huge 2- or 3-story trucks those guys drive. And he drives those down in that mine, too, sometimes. He is the father to Samantha, who's 20, and she used to come to church with us a lot. She stayed with us for several months, and she's gone back home to her mother's now. But anyway, he's the mother to Samantha, and he had a son named Cage. Now, Cage is a quick little miracle, too, I want to tell you about. He was born at 23 weeks. He weighed 15 ounces and was 10 inches long. He fit in the palm of his daddy's hand. They came out, and they told us he had 2% chance of survival. Cage is 8 years old, and he is thriving, let me tell you. And you don't think God wasn't in that? And you don't think there was some praying going on for that little boy? We were praying. We'd already moved here by that time. And we were praying, and he is a wonderful little boy. He still has a little struggle with walking, but everything else, his mind is sharp. Everything else is good. And finally then, after promising to, let me tell you real quick, though, about my other son. I've skipped him. I can't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Thanks, Vanda. He's 40, still lives in Yuma, Arizona with his wife, Karen. They work at that Yuma Proving Grounds where Curtis was stationed. They're both in the Department of Defense, very noble jobs. And they have Ender, who's 15. He's here every summer with us, if you ever see him with me back there. He's 15, and they have 2 little girls now. Penelope is going to be 5, and they just had one a week ago, 10 days ago, and her name is Adelaide Sky. My son is Skylar. Her name is Adelaide Sky. We haven't seen her except through pictures yet. But anyway, so we're very proud of what they do. I hope through this story, and I know it's gone on kind of long, and I'm sorry, I'm wrapping it up. I hope you've seen how God has been with me through every step of my life. He's continued to bless me. Sometimes I can hardly believe that God saw this sad, at that time I was scrawny, little girl from Killeen, Texas, and came running after me. He left 99 of them, and he came after me. I can't believe that. But I know that I am no longer the adult child, just the adult child of an alcoholic or the adult child of a mother with mental illness. I'm the daughter of a king. And that's the main thing I hope somebody gets out of this, that you don't have to stay in that little rut. And I wanted to. I wanted to wallow in it. I thought I was the most pitiful little girl in the world. But things started happening. And looking back over my life, I can see so many times that God was with me and given me strength. I know that he listened to me. He helped me with every step along the way. My life has been full of joy, even though those sad, horrible things. And if you don't understand that, all you have to do is ask somebody here, and we'll tell you all about how that's happening. Maybe you're struggling with some of the same things that I've struggled with. I don't know your lives. I don't know everybody's lives. I pretty well know my girls' lives over here, but maybe you've struggled with that in your past. I know not everyone has a Neil by their side. I've been blessed with that, but I want to go on record as saying, Neil's very important to me, and I know I mentioned him several times through here, but I still know that Jesus is in charge of my life, and God is the one who gave me Neil. So I have been blessed by that all my life, and I know that. My marriage is one of my biggest blessings that I can think of. But you need to know, too, that no matter what you're going through, you can have Jesus also. And if you don't, I don't know your situations, if you don't, ask us, ask Eloise, ask Darla, ask any of the ladies at my table, ask me. We'll tell you all about it. Because it's not fair for us to keep that to ourselves. You're supposed to share it. I know you don't have a Mrs. Buck, maybe. And I had a Mrs. Buck, and I was fortunate. You can have a mentor. There are women in this church that would love to mentor you if you don't have a mentor. Just ask any of us, or ask someone at the church, and they'll find a perfect mentor for you. Because maybe you just never have thought that you thought you would try to do it on your own like I did. I was trying to read that Bible in prayer, and I thought that's all I need. But Mrs. Buck showed me differently. I will leave you with this thought. In the words of Corrie ten Boom, and I thought that was kind of cool last week because who spoke last week? Yes, Kristen. She shared a quote from Corrie ten Boom, and I thought, she said it. I hope she doesn't say my quote, but she didn't. She didn't. But I love Corrie ten Boom, and I've read all of her books. You may never know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all that you have. And I'll leave you with this scripture. The past is done and can't be reversed, so it's better to look ahead. God has a good ending for those of you who trust him. Or as my dad used to say, you can't run looking backwards. Thank you. Thank you.